me, we should stay in. Got a seat at the table, you can actually change things, you can actually do things.
I'm saying that we need to take back control of our borders and our policy, and the only way we can do that is by leaving the European Union.
Staying in the EU is a tick for sort of a stronger Britain economically, a safer Britain, and a Britain where we're all better off.
Those who are the brightest and the best with the right skills for our economy would be welcome here, and actually this would be a fairer system.
We'd end up with a situation where we didn't have full access to the single market.
We were told that if we didn't join the euro, that London was finished. And look what's happened. London has prospered ever since. And I think it'll happen the same if we left the EU.
Good evening! So is London better in or out of the EU? That is the question. I'm posing tonight with a studio audience and a panel of politicians and business people on both sides of the debate. And you can join in too on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag EURefLondon. Let's get right underway now with a question on immigration from a Leave supporter. Chris Skingley, you're a student from Brentwood.
It's hard for some people to find jobs that pay above minimum wage, in part due to competition from EU workers. Would controlled immigration help job opportunities for UK nationals?
Chuka Amuna, control immigration and there are more jobs.
Well, there were two issues that you brought up there. Jobs and the impact of the European Union on our job market. Here in London, there are 650,000, at least 650,000 jobs linked to our membership of the EU. Now, I'm not going to deny that immigration poses challenges sometimes in the labour market, and I think the best way for us to ensure that actually you get a decent wage in our labour market is by having a good national minimum wage at the highest rate possible, and that we see it enforced. And that is an issue for domestic government to deal with. But in a way, you have to think about the number of jobs which are linked to our membership of the European Union, and you have to offset that against the challenges of immigration. And one thing I would just say to the audience here and viewers is the idea that immigration as a challenge is going to fall away if we leave the European Union is simply untrue.
We've
actually got more people coming here.
Let's just see with Chris. Are you dealing with a situation where you can't get a job because you think it's gone to a migrant?
I'm a student currently, no, but it's more the minimum wage. I think it's become, it's the wages more than actual immigrants supposedly stealing jobs.
What, driving wages down because there are so many potential workers? Pretty Patel, that's right, isn't it?
Well, we've seen the Bank of England have said that as well in the report that they've published, that obviously migration, more people coming to the United Kingdom from Europe, has led to wages going down by 2%. But I would like to say as well, and I think it is important, that, you know, it is a national issue for national government. There is no doubt about that when it comes to controlling our borders and having a fair immigration policy. And that is exactly what I feel and Vote Leave feel that we could achieve if we were to take back control of our immigration policy and actually say that we want the brightest and the best, and we don't have the unlimited, the free movement that comes from the European Union that we currently have.
Let's get some comments on this. Yes, sir, here.
My concern is that Brexiters should see the whole of Europe as somewhere where we can work, rather than just being so insular and being worried about the minimum wage in this country. The whole of Europe is our home to work in, and because of fears of immigration, we're losing our freedom to study, work, do business, have healthcare in all of Europe.
OK, let me bring in on that Medea Ahmed, and you're a student as well.
Yeah. As a Londoner, I feel like the language being used by the Leave campaign is actually divisive and it's fueling racial tension. And I don't understand how the net figure of immigration that the Leave campaign are really keen on using, over half of that figure are migrants from outside the EU. So how on earth is leaving going to solve the problem of immigration?
John Mills, answer that. Well, because it is now about a 50-50 split, EU and non-EU, isn't it?
It is. But I think the big problem really about immigration is the scale. Nobody wants to stop immigration altogether. The real issue is whether we can afford to have as many people coming to this country as we've got at the moment, and may well have a lot more in the future. If we have a living wage of £9 an hour, that's something like 4 times the average wage in Romania and Bulgaria. And that's going to produce a huge attraction for people to come to the UK, particularly if the European Union continues to do poorly.
But can't you then stop? Sorry, but can't you then stop non-EU people coming in because they're half the total?
Well, the answer is you can restrict to some extent. That is true. But what is really fueling the problem here is the very large number of people coming from the EU because there's no restrictions on them at all. For people to come in from outside the EU, there are at least some rules that have to be met.
Medea wants to come back in.
The Leave campaign, they have used that, saying it's not fair that outside of EU people are finding it harder. But I don't understand. Are you calling for fairer borders or an end to border or closing of borders? Because is it just a tactic being used, or
quickly, Pretty?
Well, absolutely. We are effectively saying that we need to take back control of our borders and our immigration policy. But we want fair immigration. We want the policy to end discrimination. There are people from outside of the European Union that could give a great deal to our economy and contribute a great deal to our country as well. The Commonwealth countries are a classic example as well.
You're the employment minister. You're responsible for the controls which apply to non-EU citizens coming over here, and
this government is not me solely.
You are the employment minister, and let's not forget the other side of the story here, which is that we've got 2 million Britons living and working in the European Union. We have 100,000 EU nationals helping run our public services, in particular the NHS. And here in London, we've got loads of EU citizens-owned businesses that employ Londoners.
Richard Reid, we haven't heard from you yet.
Well, firstly,
does business really need to employ EU migrants instead of British workers?
Well, I think what a business wants is the opportunity to employ brilliant people, of which they come in all shapes and sizes from all over the place. Now, in terms of this being a London debate, we've also got to get on some facts on the table. More than 2/3 of immigrants to London are from outside of the EU. So it's even more skewed to being not from the EU. So now, they're welcome as far as I'm concerned. I live in London. It is a fantastic, probably the greatest city in the world, and seen as a role model city for how it socially integrates with people of all different cultures, faiths, and as a result, we have a more joyous, vibrant, fast-growing, wealthy city. The idea that we want to start trying to ruin that,
all right.
It doesn't make sense. We have to ask ourselves, Jeremy, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of city do we want to be? What kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to be a country and a city that builds bridges or put up walls? I want to be the one that builds bridges.
It's a particular London thing, isn't it? London is different from the rest of the country. Yes, sir. Now, you've been waiting. This gentleman right here.
I worked at a company in London that were just employing exclusively Romanian guys, and they were all living in a house together. And really, they were sort of entry-level jobs, and you couldn't really get a look in if you were a British worker because you didn't speak the language. And I just don't see how that's in the interest of British people to have that situation, because with that level of EU migration there.
Right. But you wouldn't be able to, if it was the case that they were only employing people from Romania, and that was, if you like, the requirement, then that would be in breach of our employment laws, many of those rights of which, of course, derive from EU legislation.
Yeah, but he's saying their language gave them a lockout in some way. So they had it...
Supervising capacity, and there was one guy who could speak English.
Yeah.
And they were a great bunch of guys. I liked them. They worked very hard, but they were doing jobs that a British school leaver could have done, and a British person couldn't get a look in there.
OK. This gentleman here with the blue shirt, I want to just come to you as well.
Nobody seems to ask how many people do we actually need. The EU is forecast to need 40 million people by 2020. 40 million people by young people by 2020. That means about 5.5 million people for the UK alone, just to keep our ageing population going. And so why don't we actually think in those terms? What do we really need? The other thing is that we can't go around cherry-picking from places like Malawi. Recently in Manchester, there's more nurses from Malawi than there are in Malawi itself. It's not right that we go out and cherry-pick from countries around the world and bring those skills in.
All right, let's just get some more audience comments if we can. So I'll just go to this gentleman here in the front.
For me, it's not. It's the debate has gone into shall we have immigration or shall we not? It's not about that. It's about do we have control of our immigration, and that's all it should be about. It's of course we need immigration. We definitely do, but we also need to have control of it. So I'd ask you two how you would forecast in terms of capacity in public services if we stay in the European Union, where technically 500 million people have the right to come here at any time.
Well,
500 million is the figure used against you the whole time, isn't it?
Yeah, but also, I mean, that 500 million figure is 500 million consumers that our businesses can sell to in the rest of the European Union. But look, on this point, let's just get to the facts. I'm going to answer your question. Let's get to the facts, because first of all, this issue of control. To what extent do we actually have control? We're not part of the Schengen passport-free zone in the European Union. So when you get off the plane at Heathrow, Gatwick, Luton, wherever it may be, you have to show your passport before you go and get your bag. So this idea that you can just get off the plane, walk into the country, is not quite true.
Well, hang on, Pretty, I can see shaking her head here.
Your point...
With all due respect, that wasn't my question.
Well, your question was, it was predicated on there being no controls, and I'm just saying
well,
there isn't.
It wasn't predicated on that, but it was predicated on the fact that if you're part of the European Union, you can come here and work.
Yes.
So that's the whole premise of the European Union. So how can you plan for public services and not just public services, but in terms of our population?
I want to bring in Pretty because she wants to object to what she just heard.
Look, I think the reality is, as politicians, we have to level with the public and say that because of the free movement principle, we cannot plan. And classically, as we saw under previous Labour governments when there were accession countries from the European Union that joined the European Union, we didn't forecast, the previous governments did not forecast the number of people from Europe that would be coming here. On top of that, of course, we have seen a huge economic crisis across the Eurozone, and we've seen those economies hollow out, where naturally they're young populations, they want aspiration, they want a better life. Many have come here to the United Kingdom, which is a very welcoming, diverse country. Our economy is strong and it is growing. And, of course, our labour market has required their skills. That's great for us, but, of course, it's not great for their countries as well. And I think the challenge now is, of course, if we were to remain, I'm saying we need to take back control completely, but if we were to remain, there are other countries, more accession countries that will join the European Union. Can we actually sustain more people under the free movement principle coming to the United Kingdom and using our public services and our infrastructure? I would suggest not, which is why we need to vote.
You mentioned it. We'll come back to you in a second. We've had a mention there of the economy, and let's just focus on the economy now and how London's economy would fare if we did go it alone. Can we get any answers here? Would it flourish? Would it flounder? These are just some of the views from across our capital city.
Out, because I think we should be looking after ourselves, and we're not.
They must do the borders and sort that problem out, because at the moment it's mayhem.
We're perfectly capable of looking after our own finances and perfectly capable of securing business elsewhere. There, boom.
I certainly think if London were unsuccessful, that could drag the nation down very fast and into somewhere unrecoverable. I mean, the part of the problem with the Brexit argument is you just don't know where it's going.
A lot of the businesses in London, I think, would suffer with not being able to trade with Europe.
I just feel a lot more comfortable keeping things the way that they are.
As far as I'm concerned, I think it's best that we stay in.
If we remain in, the reality is the European Union is going to be on an escalator going in the wrong direction, both economically and politically for London and for the UK.
If the UK population votes to leave, how long those trade agreements take to negotiate, what terms and conditions are attached to them, no one knows. But what it does, it just creates that sense of uncertainty.
If
I was to start a business today with all the legislation that is in force for the steel industry, I simply wouldn't be able to afford it. I voted to leave the European Union because as an entrepreneur I feel that this country, the prosperity of this country will be much better off if we take the destiny in our own hands.
Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I love London town.
Mixed views there from across London, but let's stay with the economy and a question from Shanine Salmon, who's an operations coordinator from Streatham. You want to remain in the EU, Shanine?
A large proportion of business I work for is based in the EU. I'm concerned that business might go elsewhere if we leave. How will London's trade with Europe and the rest of the world be affected if we leave?
John Mills.
Well, there's been a lot of very gloomy forecasts about what would happen if we leave. But, I mean, if you start off with gloomy assumptions on these forecasts, you come up with gloomy results. If you make some more realistic assumptions, then you produce much better results. So I must say I'm very sceptical about these very poor prognostications that we've had in from a number of people. I think that actually the prospects of the UK outside are much better. And if you look at the track record of the people who said this sort of thing, if you remember when we were thinking about joining the Euro 10 or 15 years ago, how many of the establishment people said that if we didn't join, the economy would go downhill? When we were in the exchange rate mechanism 25 years ago, we were told that if we came out, then the economy would tank. Actually, exactly the opposite happened. We had 15 years of unbroken growth.
But isn't the problem that we know what we're in now because we're in it, but we can't be sure of any of that? We just don't know.
No, I think there are some things you certainly can be sure of. One is that the very worst that could happen is we go back to the World Trade Organization tariff levels, which actually are very low now. So the risk to us of not being able to trade with Europe are just not going to happen.
I can see Chukramuna flinched.
To compare this situation of whether we stay or remain in the European Union with what people thought about the euro is ridiculous. We didn't join the euro. The government then didn't want us to join the euro. You did not have all of the country's trade unions, pretty much every reputable independent forecaster saying, do something. In this case, when we're being asked whether to stay or go, there is a huge cross-section of trade unionists representing 6 million trade union members, business people, economic forecasters, all saying this is going to have a hugely detrimental effect on our economy. And this issue about trade, I'm not arguing that we wouldn't be able to trade with the rest of Europe or the rest of the world if we came out, but the question is, on what terms? And John was talking about the World Trade Organization rules, which many people who want us to leave would say we should trade with the EU under if we left, don't really amount to much. You're looking at a 10% tariff on cars, on your clothes, a 12% tariff on that. So it isn't just our ability to export, it's also how much we're going to pay for goods here that you buy in the shops. And if we weren't in the single market, tariff-free, you're going to be paying more.
But the problem is a lot of Richard Reid. Let's bring Richard Reid. You're in favour of staying in. You're a businessman.
I'm hugely in favour of staying in.
And the thing is, the trouble is, in a sense, you have a vested interest, don't you? You and business people, because it would suit you to have one world currency, wouldn't it? And for just have one nation.
It's exactly the point, Jeremy. I don't have a vested interest. 15 years ago, I set up a business from a market stall with my friends, and we grew it into a business that's trading across Europe. But I sold that business 2 years ago. I have no vested interest. I'm sat here to let people know the fantastic opportunity you have as a young entrepreneur. If you want to set up a business in this country of trading with the EU. We started in London. When we sold only our juices in London, we employed...
You took a risk, didn't you?
I took a risk.
Isn't it a good thing to take a risk?
Listen to this. When we sold only in London, we employed 20 people. When we started selling our smoothies across the country, we employed 80 people. Now that we sell our smoothies across the EU, we employ 300 people right here in London by making products here and selling them over there and creating jobs back here.
Right.
That's why it's so good for business. That's why it's so good for the economy.
Let's just see who's worried and who's thinking, no, this could work out. What do you think?
Is it not possible that we're going to have to renegotiate a trade deal if we come out? Isn't it likely that we're going to have to give up or agree to free movement of people anyway?
Yeah, now, Priti Patel, this is crucial, isn't it? If we come out of the EU, we have to trade with them and we have to work out the rules. And then we're told it's going to take 10 years. And one of the things they're going to say is you've got to allow EU citizens in. So we're right back where we started.
Well, no, I don't think we would be. And I think, actually, you know, we should start from the premise. In fact, John was right. We should be much more optimistic than some of the predictions of doom that have been put out there in the public domain. And what I thought was interesting, we saw the film earlier on where, obviously, business was divided. Business was 50-50. There was a young entrepreneur there who had also said that, you know, he was for out because of the level of the bureaucracy and the restrictions and the need to take back control. The point is about trade is that obviously we purchase, well, Europe sells a lot of goods to us, basically. For them, would they really put up all these barriers when they need that growth, when they need to do business with us? That would be a full act of self-harm.
Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing, Jeremy.
Quickly, what's the answer to that?
The answer to that is they are a far bigger customer to us than we are to them. 40% of our exports in this city goes to the European Union. 44% of our national exports go to the European Union. The average of the exports of the remaining 27 member states that comes here, their average exports is 5% to the UK. So we are nowhere near as important as a customer to them.
Well, there are lots of different ways of measuring.
No, but Jeremy, that's the point.
That's a key point.
It's about relative importance in a negotiation.
I understand. Let's just see. Is there anyone here who's, just to get somebody on the Remain side, who thinks this is too big a risk? Anyone working who think, are you worried? Are you a student or are you got a job?
I'm a student.
Right. So you're not going to lose your job, you haven't got one. But you're worried you might not have one.
He wants one. But let's say the predictions of doom are at the kind of the most extreme.
Yeah.
I will leave university in a job climate which is at best dismal. You know, I will come out.
Because your worry is that if we leave, we could lose a lot of jobs. Is that right?
Yes, well, we could. You may well be right, but we don't quite know if we will end up in a recession.
And Jeremy, the chap is absolutely right, because every single independent economic analysis across the world has said we will go backwards if you come out. And these guys just sit there and go, oh, it's rubbish, you don't want to listen to them. They haven't provided a single bit of an economic analysis themselves. They just sit there saying the world is wrong. You have to believe that the world is wrong and they're right. It's just unlikely.
Other analyses are available, as we know with all this thing. There's true that there's a lot of people lining up on your side. But one of the key things, Pretty and John, surely, is the emotional thing, that you just don't take the risk with something as important as people's jobs and livelihoods. It's too dangerous.
I tell you what, Jeremy, I mean, it's really interesting to hear what you've just said as a student, and obviously you quite rightly are concerned about your future. I left university at the time of the ERM crisis, and the ERM crisis destroyed people's livelihoods and destroyed people's employment opportunities. And it's the same economists who are telling us to stay now, who basically at that time as well said that we must join the ERM. And that was a catastrophe. My parents were lucky to keep the roof over their heads, they really were. And
but isn't this the thing of, isn't this like saying experts built the Titanic?
Dump all the blame with the EU. Ignore what the Conservative government at the time was doing. Dump all the blame with the EU. I mean, come on.
But there were economists at the time, the same voices that are exactly saying that we should stay in. And the point is as well, I've been very clear already, you know, there'll be new opportunities if we were to leave the European Union. And at the same time, of course, you've seen the film as well. Business voices are divided. Businesses are not saying, so the larger companies are not saying we're going to pack up and leave right now.
All right, hang on, panel.
Let's have to correct things.
Okay, don't just talk about it.
No, it's true. The mass majority of businesses, small, medium and large, and the mass majority of entrepreneurs are on the record as wanting to stay in. We recognise what a great opportunity it is.
Okay.
Don't let them. It's a statement of fact. It's a statement of fact.
Out of interest, were you in favour of Britain? Hang on. Were you in favour of Britain going into the euro?
I was not.
OK.
But also, you don't need to be economists to know the most common sense point. How is it going to be good for our business and our economy to turn around and poke our biggest customer in the eye?
That's the point. OK, let's go back to some more, with some relief, some more audience voices. Maybe this gentleman here with the white shirt. Yeah.
Hi, guys. You kind of always say that the whole Leave campaign at the moment is telling us how bad Europe is and how terrible it is. But there's no plan, there's no plans in action. What is the plan if we leave? How do you plan, A, to trade with Europe? What are the things you're going to put in place? And B, let's say the worst does happen and we go backwards. How are you going to plan to bring us back forward again?
I'll come to the plan is a good question, but let's just take a couple more voices. I want to leave you out. So the lady on the back row, yes, you, yes.
I just graduated from university and I found a job straight away in immigration law. And I support free movement workers. I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. But if there was a shortage of jobs, the free movement of workers means that I can go to another European country and work there. So if there's a shortage of jobs here, then I'm just likely to go there and find a job.
I promise we come back quickly, John Mills. We hear this again and again from the other side. There's no plan from your side. There's no plan.
Well, I think there is a plan. There's a plan which we use the World Trade Organization as the backstop. That's the very worst case we'd have. But I think the chances of us not having some sort of free trade deal with the rest of the European Union if we left are extremely low. There is industrial free trade right across the whole of the continent of Europe at the moment.
Well, I think
from Iceland, wait a minute, Choco, from Iceland to Turkey, from Latvia to Portugal. The idea that we're going to finish up with the British economy being the only one which is outside is really for the
OK,
boat.
we'll come back to you shortly on a slightly different tack. A reminder, you are watching Better In or Out, a BBC London referendum special. You can have your say on Twitter using the hashtag EURefLondon. And it's not only the economy that's at the centre of the debate over whether we are better in or out of the EU. There are concerns too over security. The former president of the Association of Chief Police Officers, Sir Hugh Orde, and Richard Walton, former head of counter-terrorism at Scotland Yard, put the case now for and against.
We need to remain in Europe so we can continue to keep our citizens safe and indeed citizens in other countries that are also member states. Membership of the EU gives us access to certain powers. At the top of my list would be the European arrest warrant. That allows member states to bring to justice those who try to evade capture by running to another country. Membership gives us access to joint investigation teams. So where criminals don't respect borders, police forces from different countries can work as one. There appears to be common agreement that if we leave, we will lose these essential powers. We're yet to find out what they will be replaced with. In my judgment, they will be less effective, more bureaucratic, more time-consuming, and as a consequence, the citizens of this country will be less safe.
If we were to leave the European Union, it would make little or no difference to our security and security of London. If anything, actually, it could make us more secure because we'd be able to control our borders in a more substantial way. We'd still be able to collaborate with our neighbouring countries, Germany, France, Belgium. We'd still be able to share intelligence and information. This is a global threat we face in terms of the terrorist threat, and we need a global approach to it, not a regional one. Operationally, this country actually contributes more intelligence to Europe than it actually receives. We have the best and finest intelligence agencies. If we were to leave the EU, there'd be no difference in our operational capability. London would be just as safe, if not safer.
The views of Richard Walton and Sir Hugh Orde. And a question on security now from Peter Jones from Hornchurch. I gather you've not decided which way to vote yet.
I haven't, no. My question is, overall, what difference would leaving the EU have to the security of London?
Well, I sit on the Home Affairs Select Committee of the House of Commons, and I can tell you that the framework that we have, that the European Union gives us, is a fantastic platform on which we share information. Now, I wouldn't argue that if we leave, we won't be sharing any information, but we've got various different systems. The European arrest warrant, which allows us to bring people back to face justice here. For example, one of the people who tried to do a further bombing on 7/7 in 2005, but also enables us to deport people, over 6,000 people, back to their countries of origin. We share the criminal information system. We share records so that we can go after some of these people planning terrible things. And, of course, we've got a prisoner exchange programme. And Europol, which I think was mentioned in the clip there, Europol is actually headed up by a Brit. Now, I'm not saying all of this will go. I'm not going to be disingenuous like that. But we've actually got sharing systems that work. And I don't know of any serious person who is saying that we would be safer if we left the European Union, as that former Met officer said. And
actually, that is true, Pretty, isn't it? That there's... People can say, well, if we're out, we'll be as safe or no more at risk. But no one... He's right in saying, Chukramina, that that nobody's saying will be safer outside.
Well, I think there are some important points of principle here as well. And you've seen the video and you've heard the two cases. I think the point to make, though, is it'll have, you know, strengthened the government's ability. Obviously, data sharing will continue, information sharing will continue. This is a global challenge that we face now. So effectively, it's a case of the government deciding how it continues going forward, but also in terms of issues such as prisoner exchanges and transfers. There could be things that we could do in terms of the European Court of Justice as well, where we have rulings coming from them that stop us from deporting foreign nationals that are currently in our prisons. And, you know, that has been a real feature in the past when we've seen...
Name one of the rulings.
Well, when we've seen prisoners that are in our, well, individuals that we've not been able to deport. The classic case as well, and we saw a list that was published last week of 50 individuals who we were unable to deport back to Europe.
Security. Are we safer in? Let's just go to the back row there.
How come criminals can come through the security system and then they end up in jail and we end up picking up the tab?
OK, anyone else? Anyone else? Let's just have a look. Who hasn't spoken? You haven't spoken yet, sir.
Yes, uncontrolled immigration allows vicious criminals and terrorists to enter our country unchecked, raising the safety of everyone here. The cost of police time, courts and keeping these criminals in prison and jail is a massive drain on our economy, together with the schooling, housing and age costs. How can we control this, being in the EU?
Well, interestingly, you make a point there. I said that no one's suggesting that we could be safer outside, but you're saying that we would be, because you answer this, Richard Reid. People concerned that criminals are coming in under this EU passport umbrella.
Well, when we're talking about issues of crime and terrorism, this is a really important topic. And I think what we've really got to do is look to the experts. This is not a sort of armchair topic. It is the clear statement on the record of the mass majority of professionals in the security services that's saying that Britain is safer by staying in. It is also a myth perpetrated by those two on that side that we don't have control of our borders. It's crazy. You have to show a passport, and we have the right to turn back anyone that we don't like. That is something that was negotiated recently, is what turned Theresa May from being a potential outer to being an inner, because she got what she needed, she said, to keep this country safe.
And if someone is here from the EU and we don't want them here, can we just get rid of them at will?
If they've committed a crime...
If they've committed a crime again. Can I just answer your specific point, sir? Because you asked a specific point, and I want to answer it. I suppose what I would say to you is, if we left the European Union, would we have no foreign criminals coming here at all? Now, I don't think that is the case. And actually, if you look at the overall numbers, I think the majority of foreign national offenders come from outside the European Union than actually from the European Union. So look, I'm not denying it isn't an issue, but of course we have issues in terms of deporting people, but of course people have some of our criminals too. So I just simply make the point just to say I don't think leaving the European Union is necessarily going to solve the problem you've identified.
Bring in this lady here in the middle.
Preeti said something about there being global challenges. Isn't it counterintuitive and against common sense that in a world that is globalising, that we would move away from the rest of the world and isolate ourselves in order to deal with global challenges? It doesn't make any sense.
I was just going to add to that. We've seen some terrible events in the United States in the last 24 hours. Absolutely shocking. That's come out of homegrown situations.
Exactly. And I think this is the scale of the challenge, actually, of all governments. Let me be abundantly clear with the audience, Jeremy. I'm not talking about non-cooperation or, you know, withdrawing any information sharing. Of course, that is ridiculous to suggest that, and that would not happen. But I think, you know, again, listening to expert views, there are people, experts. You know, the former head of Interpol has effectively said that Europe has become a passport-free zone. We do have challenges, as raised by the audience. The lady at the top there made it abundantly clear that there are problems of people coming that do commit crimes, that end up in our prisons.
You cannot get into this country without a passport.
Chika, can I just finish?
Every time you go through the airport,
if I may
have
just finish, because actually this speaks to a wider political debate, not just in this referendum, but actually I think a challenge for political parties right now, which is addressing the concerns and anxiety of the public when it comes to the criminal justice system and actually keeping our people safe and the country safe, but also immigration as well and free movement, and the fact that with that comes a lot of challenges.
Yes, sir.
How does doing a deal with Turkey on potential free movement of up to 77 million Turks aid our security if we stay within the EU?
Well, Shuka, quickly.
Well, on that, you get this whole... I mean, you know, the Remain side gets accused of being Project Fear. All the stories that have been put out about Turkey and Turkish people coming over here, that is the biggest Project Fear story there is. And let's be absolutely clear about this. We have a veto on enlargement of the European Union. Turkey is not going to be joining the European Union anytime soon. It's just not going to happen. And you have all these scare stories put out that suddenly there's going to be millions of Turks all coming to London.
But they're already going to be able to travel, right?
But there is no evidence that that is actually going to happen. And there was some story today about a diplomat who, you know, put out something in relation to visas being granted to Turkish people, which in the end...
Why did we do a deal with...
It's not government policy.
The EU did a deal with Turkey to ensure that they took back illegal immigrants from Greece. But in exchange for that, there was going to be potential free movement.
You said potential. There isn't. There isn't that free movement,
I'm being very balanced about it. There was potential free movement.
But it hasn't happened, sir.
It may not have happened yet, but can you sit there and sincerely say that it's never going to happen if we stay within the EU?
I do not believe it will happen if we stay in the EU.
You don't believe it will happen?
No, I don't.
So I'm saying potentially it may happen. You say you don't believe it will happen.
I don't think it will happen.
One more point from this gentleman here.
There's a real misunderstanding about what it is to be Europe. Europe has kept us secure since the Second World War. It was a peace pact between France and Germany. That is the rights of Western Europe has had peace. And people don't understand and don't remember that. And we shouldn't lose our international rights out of fear of terrorism, because it's international citizenship that counts.
OK, before we close, let's just see if there's anyone who came here undecided who's been clocking this, maybe just one step removed, thinking about it. And everyone made up their minds before they arrived. I don't believe that. Oh, you were a bit undecided, were you?
I am.
This gentleman here,
I was and I still am, because I have, through all the months of these discussions, neither side has given me a compelling, cogent reason for why I should follow their side.
What about the last 40 minutes?
No, I'm not convinced by any of it. I hear so much bloviation, so much, well, it'll be like this. Oh, no, it's all scaremongering. I haven't heard cogent reasons and policies.
OK, anyone else with a thought on what we've heard, on what... Yes, you've been waiting, the guy in the beard there.
As discussed point to Chaka and Richard, you really got to get away from thinking that if we do leave, that suddenly it's like cutting a cord and that's it, Europe is distant. When it comes to security, you mean to tell me that Britain got information about a terrorist or something that was of national interest to Europe? They're going to ring Europe, and Europe are going to say, "Oh, sorry, we can't deal with you anymore because you're out."
Let's just stay on the bigger point. Hang on.
We're not arguing that, and I did make the point that I said when I answered the question that I don't think there's suddenly going to be no cooperation.
OK.
But the question is, look, we've got a framework. We've got a framework in place that's working. So that's my point.
Let's go back to security, sir. Let's not go back to security. We're talking about the big issue here. We're about to close the programme. So we've had 40 minutes now. Some of you have come maybe undecided. Has anyone flipped? Has anyone gone from one... I don't mean flipped in a sense, in a catastrophic emotional sense. Well, what about you? But you were Brexit when you came.
Yes, and I still am. My point is, my car is made in India. My phone is made in South Korea. My trousers are from Indonesia. My shirt's from Morocco. All of these countries trade with the EU, but they don't have to give up their control over their money, their borders, and their democracy.
Okay.
So why can't we do the same thing as an independent country?
So it's not the same thing. It isn't the same thing, because when we trade with the European Union, our European partners, we're doing so tariff-free. So obviously the nature of that relationship is different from the relationships that we have with... And also the other thing, by the way, sir, is I don't think it's an either-or. Of course we want to trade with all those emerging markets, but you don't cut off your nose to spite your face. You don't say, oh, we're going to ignore our biggest customer because we want to pursue new opportunities. You do both.
Just one more voice. Every time I ask for a question, you put your hand up, and I felt so bad I never asked you. What do you make of the last 40 minutes? What do you think?
I think the important point we have to realise is that when we start putting barriers up against our closest neighbours, we are not only shutting them out, we are also shutting ourselves out from going out into Europe and the world.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. I wish we could do more. Thank you. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks for the panel. I know we could do this for another 2 hours at least, but that's where we must leave it. So is London better in or out of the EU? That is for you to decide on June the 23rd. In the meantime, the lines are open for you to have your say on BBC Radio London, and the debate continues on our Facebook page and on Twitter, and doubtless in the studio as well. Thanks to my panel, thanks to the audience here, thanks to you as well for watching. Good night.